In the luxury segment, there are tons and tons of two-row vehicles, but if you need a third row, there are fewer options, and if you need a third row and you want to spend less than about $65,000, you have even fewer options. Interestingly, BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, and Genesis don't even offer an entry in this particular segment. Today I'm taking a look at the Infiniti QX60, which is itself an interesting entry. Perhaps it's the brand Infiniti rather than specifically this vehicle that I find interesting, because Infiniti has decided to really change course and steer in a different direction than the competition. You see, at the launch of the QX60, which really wasn't that long ago, Infiniti executives said that the future of the brand and the future of the product portfolio was going to be what they called Nissan Plus. That means basically luxurious versions of Nissan vehicles. So definite part sharing under the hood, but with different styling, a more luxurious mission, and a separate dealer network. Now, if you're thinking Acura and Lexus, yes, sort of, but Toyota would never use the phrase Toyota Plus when describing Lexus, and Honda certainly wouldn't do that with Acura either. So I was really surprised that Nissan said that with this QX60, because it is, of course, closely related to the Nissan Pathfinder. It always has been. With a base MSRP over $47,000, the price tag is certainly plus versus the Nissan Pathfinder, but so is the design of the QX60. This looks a lot more elegant, a lot more luxurious, and a lot less bubbly than the last generation. I like these angry LED headlights, no LED fog lights below, that's kind of an odd twist. Front parking sensors, rear parking sensors on this particular model, big Infiniti grille there, and then they put the radar cruise control sensor right down there at the bottom. The boxier styling continues around the side of the QX60. This is about the same size as the outgoing model at just over 198 inches long. This is also about the same size as the Acura MDX, but notably longer than the mid-size two-row vehicles that you might want to cross-shop with this if you're really debating whether or not you need that third row in the back. You can get an optional third row in something like the Genesis GV80, the BMW X5, the Mercedes-Benz GLE, etc., but this third row was designed for more frequent use than the ones that we see in those smaller entries. And that's why it has sort of a SUV meets minivan look right back here. That's just something that you get when you have a real usable third row. We also see this look in something like the Audi Q7, the XC90, or of course that Acura MDX with a much squarer back end. The Infiniti designers tried their best to hide the bulk of the QX60 with things like this window that wraps right there around towards the rear with this sort of split fork trim there, and LED taillights that wrap from one side onto the other. But there's no way around it. The QX60 is certainly a large three-row vehicle, and that is certainly an asset because this has one of the wider cargo areas in this segment. If you're looking to be able to put 4x sheet goods in your luxury crossover, this is one of the incredibly few options. You certainly cannot do that in the XC90 or the Q7 or the X5, etc. Infiniti neatly hides the button to open and close that hatch right there in that black portion of the bar, rather than making you reach right there under that license plate. At the bottom of the bumper, we have faux exhaust tips. That's something that we're seeing in a lot of the competition as well. There have been a ton of rumors that maybe in the future a hybrid system might find its way under this hood, but at the moment we have just one engine. It's basically the same 3.5-liter naturally aspirated V6 we found in the previous generation QX60. Under this hood, it produces 295 horsepower and 270 pound-feet of torque. The big change under here is that there is no longer a continuously variable automatic transmission in the QX60. Instead, they've borrowed the 9-speed ZF automatic transmission that we actually saw in the MDX for a while, and also we see in a number of Jeep products and a number of other European products as well. This transmission definitely gives the QX60 more of a conventional feel out on the road, and it has a minor improvement in real-world fuel economy as well, especially if you live in a state with higher speed limits. As before, you can get your QX60 as either a front-wheel drive vehicle or an all-wheel drive vehicle. Today I'm driving the all-wheel drive version, and this all-wheel drive system, as I'm going to talk about in the drive section, seems to be a bit more focused on improving traction rather than overtly improving handling ability, like the all-wheel drive system we find in the MDX. Bearing in mind that in the luxury segment there are front seats that contort in a million different ways, I'm going to give these seats 6 out of 10 points because the driver's seat does not have as much adjustability as I would like. I would like the front seat bottom cushion to come up a little bit further for my height. If you have longer legs, you might find that more comfortable. We also have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support in the driver's seat, but it's not terribly aggressive. It doesn't come out of the seat back as much as I would like. We do, however, have a 4-way powered tilt telescopic steering column, something that we don't find in a Volvo XC90 at any price. It's memory linked to the 2-position memory over there on the driver's door, and neither of these seats offer a power extending thigh cushion. At its core, the QX60 is all about being a pragmatic people carrier, and it really shows in the back. The second row is definitely very comfortable. I have plenty of headroom, even though this model has the optional panoramic moonroof. The rear seats, or I should say these second row seats, have a decent amount of recline, and they also slide forward and backwards so you can help apportion the space a bit more equitably between the second row and the third row. We also have a center seat right here, and a lot of the competition, by the time you've worked your way up even to the middle trims, they delete this center seat, which is pretty important for some folks. Now, in kind of an odd twist, even though the QX60 has a really wide third row, which we're going to talk about in a bit, it does not have a center seat belt in the back. So 7 seats are achieved by 2 seats up front, 3 in the middle, and then just 2 in the way back. The reason I find this surprising is vehicles like a Toyota Highlander, which have a much narrower third row, put a third seat belt there. And as you can see, an adult person at 6 feet tall, you really could put 3 of us across the back if you needed to, or definitely some slimmer people. There is definitely enough room right here in the center position for me to sit. There's just no seat belt there. Now, in terms of legroom, it's pretty generous. This front seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. This middle seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I have about 2 inches of legroom left. One nice touch is that third row passengers also get air vents. All the air vents in the back are positioned in the ceiling. That does mean that this portion of the ceiling cuts in just a little bit versus some of the competition, but I like the fact that the third row gets air vents, and that's not something we see in all 3-row vehicles. Another nice touch that is standard in all QX60s, power release second row seats to make getting out of the third row easier. With no third seatbelt back here, you might be wondering what is in the middle. The answer is a small rubbery storage area to keep your smartphone from rolling around. Rear passengers also get cup holders and USB charge ports. As with the previous QX60, this model is one of the most child-friendly 3-row crossovers in the US, regardless of the mainstream segment or the full-size segment. Part of that is because we have a really wide second row here, so if you're planning to put 3 child seats across, or 2 child seats in a booster seat, or mix adults and child seats, it's going to be a lot more comfortable in here than some of the narrower options. And even though there are only 2 seats back there in the third row, that third row is wider than something like a Highlander or an XC90, so it's going to make it more comfortable for everybody back there. But there's yet another trick up its sleeve. We have the ability to leave a child seat, like this forward-facing child seat, latch anchored into place, tilt and slide that seat forward for easy access to the third row. This is something that you cannot do in any of the European options. It's also something that you can't do in the bestseller in this segment, the Acura MDX. Now, this seat is weighted such that when a child seat is latched into place, even just this seat without a child in it, you'll see it barely pops up there. And if there was the additional weight of a child in there, you'd really have to be pretty forceful and push it up in order to make it move in that manner. Now, this functionality will only work if the child seat is latch anchored into place. If you are using the shoulder belt, obviously it's not going to move in that manner, but it does make it a lot more convenient. And even in situations where, say, you have a booster seat, it's latch anchored into place and the child is using the shoulder belt right there, it's still going to be a lot more convenient than the alternatives. And this vehicle will do it in all 3 seating positions here in the second row. You can do that over here on this 60% side of the seat back over here on the driver's side. In terms of latch anchors, there are sort of 3.5, I guess you'd say. We have dedicated latch anchors for the outboard seating position over here on the 40% side, 1 dedicated set of latch anchors back there in the third row, and then over here on the 60% side of the second row, there are 3 anchors. The middle seat and the driver's side seat share a center anchor. As always, remember to consult the owner's manual of not just the vehicle itself, but also the child seat manufacturer. Everything needs to align as far as weights, and of course, the usability of those latch anchors. For instance, right in here it says, do not use this common tether point between the center seat position and the driver's seat position at the same time. You're supposed to either put the child seat in the middle or on the driver's seat, not both. Some of you might be thinking, well, I'm still going to have to use the shoulder belt, so this is still going to be a pain point for me because my child is too heavy to use the latch anchors exclusively. Well, fear not, if you put the child seat in the middle, this seat belt comes out of the second row seat itself. And that means that if the child is anchored in with this seat belt and a forward-facing child seat right like this in the center seat position, this seat will still fold and tumble the same way, giving you easy access to that third row. Behind the power hatch, we find 14.5 cubic feet of cargo space. That puts this a little bit behind the Lincoln Aviator and the Acura MDX, and well behind the Buick Enclave, but decently above most of the European options that offer a third row, at least, again, in this price and size category. Don't worry, the extra cargo capacity does not come at the expense of a spare tire. We still find a temporary spare under the vehicle, just under the load floor. As we look around the interior, you should know that this is not the top end trim, but it is an upper end trim. So we have features like this large panoramic glass moonroof. You can see those air vents for the second rows. And we also have well integrated sunshades for the second row passengers. The climate controls for the second row are right back here at the rear of the center console. This particular model has leather upholstery with two-way adjustable headrests and height adjustable shoulder belts. If you're not a fan of heavily bolstered front seats, this might be a good option for you. We don't find too much bolstering on the seat bottom or the seat back cushion. Moving over to the front doors, we have lots of soft touch and premium materials going on here. Really only the very bottom portion of the door right down there around that bottle holder is made from a hard plastic. You can see that this particular model has the optional Bose audio system in it. In addition to the distinctive door speaker grills, we also have some upgraded speakers right there on the A-pillar. The dashboard has a very attractive two-step look with an upper tier there that's made of an injection molded plastic that's then been after-stitched, then real stitched materials right here in the middle. There's a strip of piano black right there rather than wood trim or something like that, and then soft touch materials going down the dashboard. There's a pretty decently sized bin-style glove compartment over here. I was able to barely fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside, and the lid for the glove box is also a soft touch material. Moving on over to the middle of the dashboard, we have a touchscreen infotainment system perched right there on top. One interesting twist, unlike a lot of modern infotainment systems in luxury vehicles, Apple CarPlay or Android Auto will not use the entire screen. There's always going to be that small section over there reserved for something else. Now, on the bright side, that does mean that that's always going to be reserved for whatever you want. So you can change that. In this case, it's media. So if I wanted to use the factory mapping interface, that's going to be over here. Media is going to be right over there. As we see in other Infiniti vehicles, you can interact with the system either via the touchscreen or with this controller knob in the center console. So you do have your choice. It's a little bit less limiting than, say, the Acura MDX. These air vents in the dashboard are a little bit unusual. You can see we have this little tiny tail right here at the bottom. It kind of ends up a little awkwardly tucked in when the vent is pushed all the way down, and then this center rib does not move. So if the vent is pointing up, it's like that. If the vent is pointing down, it actually becomes a little bit difficult to grab, but it does have a really clean look. Below that, we have the controls for the tri-zone automatic climate control, also touch controls for heated and ventilated seats, and then touch controls for some of that climate control system as well. We then have a joystick style shifter. If I put my foot on the brake, we press this button, pull back for drive, hit the P button for park. There's the engine start-stop button, drive mode selector right here that toggles through the various drive modes, a button to disable auto start-stop. There is a wireless charging mat right there, and two large cup holders. We then have the electric parking brake and auto brake hold, and then again, those duplicate controls for that infotainment system. Between the front seats, we find a softly padded center armrest. The storage area inside is a little bit smaller than I thought it would be. Given the bulk of the center console, I had kind of assumed that it would be a little bit roomier. On the driver's side, we have an attractive large LCD instrument cluster with two different views. You can basically condense those dials to these really stylized dials over here on the side. In the middle, we get our typical trip computer readouts, things like tire pressure, 4x4 information, turn-by-turn navigation directions, infotainment, etc., but we don't have a moving map display like you do find in some vehicles. The leather-wrapped steering wheel has sport grips up top, a slightly flat bottom to make getting in and out of the vehicle a little bit easier. Pretty thin side spokes with buttons on them. You'll see the paddles on the back. Those are for shifting, down on the left, up on the right. On the left side of the steering wheel, we have volume up, down, track forward, backward, and then the rest of the buttons relate to that multifunction cluster. On this side of the steering wheel, we have some voice command buttons, and then the buttons for the radar adaptive cruise control and the semi-autonomous driving system. That's what the little blue button enables and disables. When you get the QX60 out on the road, you're definitely going to notice this new 9-speed automatic transmission. The shifts are crisp, they're relatively fast, and it's definitely a significant improvement over the CVT that we found in the outgoing QX60. I'm not the biggest CVT hater out there. I think they definitely have a time and they have a place, but in a luxury 3-row crossover, I never quite thought it was the right time or the right place, and this is much more appropriate. Now, the key thing to know about this 9-speed automatic is that sometimes it can feel a little bit unusual. That's just due to the design of the 9-speed itself. This is exactly the same 9-speed automatic transmission we find in the Jeep Cherokee, also the Acura MDX, a number of Honda and Acura products, and a few Land Rover products as well. There are times where, as you're shifting up and down across the gear sets, it can feel like the transmission maybe is in neutral, and that's just due to the design of the transmission. Nothing's actually wrong. But most people are probably going to get very used to that. As long as you're tooling around most of the gears that you're going to be using, the shifts are going to feel pretty crisp and pretty normal. On the other hand, because we have a naturally aspirated engine and a relatively heavy 3-row crossover, 0 to 60 times are not going to be as quick as you might find in some of the competition. This particular model went 0 to 60 in 7.1 seconds. That is definitely slower than the slowest version of the XC90 in the United States, also a little bit slower than the Acura MDX, etc. In my braking tests, it took 122 feet for this vehicle to stop from 60 miles an hour back to zero. That's not too far off the last generation QX60. And that surprised me a little bit because we have slightly larger brakes here and slightly wider tires as well. I'm not entirely clear what's going on there. It may have to do with the tire itself that has changed. The brand and the exact tire fitment is different in this model than it was in the previous generation QX60. And these tires, well, they're not exactly the grippiest, let's just put it that way. If you're out on your favorite winding mountain road, the QX60 is certainly going to feel bigger and feel heavier than an MDX, even though it really isn't any bigger than the MDX. Some of that, I think, has to do with this all-wheel drive system. It doesn't really send much power to the rear axle, unless you're in snow mode. I actually found that even though this vehicle really dumbs down the throttle pedal in snow mode, it actually has a better feel out on a road like this if you really dig your foot into it than in the regular or auto mode. Sport mode is a little bit more aggressive at sending power to the rear, but you really have to be aggressive and absolutely floor it around a corner like that to get maybe even 10% of the engine's power, according to the display at least, to the rear axle. And you will certainly notice that out on the road. This definitely does not cut a corner as quickly or as sharply as an MDX or an XC90 or a Buick Enclave, to be perfectly honest. It's pretty clear that when designing the QX60, Infiniti was targeting a more pragmatic blend of features, something that's a bit more family-friendly, a little bit more comfortable. So if that's what you're looking for, this is going to be an excellent fit. If you're looking for something that's overtly sporty, you might want to shop somewhere else. Now, this definitely has a more cohesive feel to it, a better balanced feel to it than the previous generation QX60, but in braking maneuvers, there's plenty of dive, in acceleration, there's plenty of tip, and there's definitely a reasonable amount of body roll around the corners. And as well balanced as the platform may be, it's pretty easy for your right foot to write checks that the tires just can't cash around corners. The suspension doesn't become upset over broken pavement, it's just there's not a lot of grip going on. Out on a rougher road like the gravel road that I'm on now, I give ride quality an A-. It is pretty well controlled, and the softer suspension definitely makes this a better highway cruiser, even though this particular model does have larger wheels and tires on it than we find on the base version of the QX60. But I don't think the ride is as well polished as some of the luxury competition. Now, admittedly, that would mainly be more expensive competitors with features like adaptive air suspensions or just adaptive dampers, generally speaking. The trade-off, of course, to that adaptive damper technology or an airlift suspension is going to be long-term maintenance costs. Likely with a naturally aspirated V6 engine rather than a turbocharger and a traditional 9-speed automatic transmission, long-term maintenance costs on this are probably going to be lower than many of those European options or something like the MDX with those additional features. On the other hand, the cabin is pretty quiet. I measured 71 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, definitely quieter than the last XC90 that I drove, and when you floor it, you get that attractive naturally aspirated V6 engine sound rather than a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that we do find in a lot of the competition. Over a week of mixed driving, this all-wheel drive model has also delivered reasonable fuel economy, been averaging 22 mpg. That is definitely above a number of the base engine entries in the competition, but you could get something like a Volvo XC90 plug-in hybrid that will get you about 27 mpg and of course have an electric range. There is also the upcoming Lexus RX hybrid that's going to give you right around 35 or so mpg most likely, although it's not going to have a third row. There may be another Lexus model with 3 rows, but the RX is no longer going to get that particular option. And of course, there is no accurate MDX hybrid anymore, and most of the MDX lineup actually seem to score a little bit below this when it comes to fuel economy. Bottom line out on the road, the QX60 is a well-sorted but not overly exciting 3-row crossover. Again, if you're looking for something that's more comfortable, a little bit quieter, and you don't mind giving up acceleration or handling ability, the QX60 is going to be a solid choice. The stopping distance is a little bit longer than some of the competition, but it's not overly long. I think 122 feet is just fine. And again, if you're looking for something that's a little bit more relaxed, drives a little bit slower, but still gets you where you need to go in comfort, that's exactly where the QX60 shines. If you're one of the brave few that watches all the way to the end of my videos for my detailed pricing and comparison section, I have a little bit of bad news for you. That's going to be in a second video from now on because of the way that Google and YouTube handle watch statistics, unfortunately. So just continue watching to the end of this video, click the option on the lower right-hand side of your screen. You'll see an icon of the thumbnail for this particular car, and it'll say pricing and comparisons, and I will see you over there if you're interested. If not, I'll see all of you next week.